Welcome to the Fit for Halter podcast. We're bringing practical content and community straight to the halter exhibitor. I'm your host, Amy Zabel, and today we're going to talk about equine nutrition. I'm excited to introduce to you Kelley and Adam Wainscott of Covenant Show Horses from Sanger, Texas. So we're just going to jump right in and hear. Hi. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. Absolutely. So first, let's just hear about the Wainscots and Covenant Show Horses.
You want that one?
Kelley and I own and operate Covenant Show Horses in Sanger, Texas. We've been married for, this is terrible.
Almost 6 years.
Almost 6 years. Anyways, and we specialize in conformation and halter horses for a variety of clients, ranging from in their 80s to below in single digits. And that's what we do. We also stand a stallion, Hes Stylin, and that's pretty much what we do.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about who you are. I'm sure we'll hear more as we go along. So we're here to talk about equine nutrition. What was the attraction for you to study equine nutrition?
You know, Adam and I were raised about 8 miles from each other in Indiana, and we were both horse crazy kids. And when we talk about kind of where the passion came from, it really wasn't nutrition to begin with. It was the horse. And we both would ride anything with hair from about the age of 6 individually into our pro careers. But my mom and dad, when I finished high school and I was showing and judging horses and exercising horses for money to help pay for shows and anything I could do that was like horse related, my folks said, well, we've written a lot of checks for horses and we know there's been benefit in it, but you need to go away to college so you can figure out a way to write checks for horses when you get older. And I thought, well, okay, how do I make sure I can do horses while I'm doing studies? So I used my background in judging to pay for an undergraduate degree at Oklahoma State University, and then moved on into a master's of agriculture there, all while doing all things horse related. But my focus and kind of passion for nutrition really started collegiately when I was looking for subjects that I could get passionate about in studying more specific topics through my master's of ag. And I had great leaders and kind of thoughtful leaders at school at OSU, Dr. Don Topliff and others that really were kind of thought leaders in what types of questions the industry could utilize in research study. So that's where it began. And then again, with the idea in mind that my mom and dad said, you have to figure out how this is going to pay you. When I graduated my master's, I went to work in Aubrey, Texas, kind of in the heart of horse country, working for a feed nutrition distribution group. It's a family-owned feed store, D&L Farm and Home, and they still, 25 years later, feed every major horseman in the Aubrey Pilot Point and now other areas, Salina, and all these areas. And so I was really blessed. I went to work directly for them as their equine nutrition specialist. And they introduced me to a group of PhDs in several of the nutrition companies that gave me my first year of real world experience in nutrition. And so that's kind of where I went from a horse crazy kid to a nutrition horse crazy kid. And I was blessed that I was in Aubrey when that happened with all these great horsemen around me. And so we were picking each other's brains when I was young about how nutrition could improve their situations. And then at the same time, learning what those great horsemen were doing at the time in terms of feeding great halter horses. So for me, it was it was almost 2 years that I was doing that work. And then the 2 years before that in my master's that I focused really primarily on nutrition as it relates to show horses. And that's where it started for me.
And for
Awesome.
me, it really was, I knew that you had to feed horses consistently. I knew that, they needed hay and they needed grain and water. Exactly what all it was that went into it growing up, and then early in my younger professional career, I kind of left all that up to the professionals, if you will, the feed salesmen, the different feed stores, and that sort of thing. I really didn't get exposed to that side of things until obviously when I met Kelley. And that's kind of when the understanding of why certain things are important, and kind of what makes things really different and really better really does work, and how those things work. So mine's been more recent.
Sure.
It's really
So
the
then,
cornerstone for us
yeah.
of how we optimize each individual horse in our current program. And when I was young and working in this nutrition field, but still very much hungry, my heart was still hungry to figure out how to make a profession out of training and fitting horses. That was still burning inside of me as I was working. I loved what I was learning, but I had more in mind. And I recognized that this nutrition information was vital as a cornerstone, as a platform, really, to go into the industry and try to begin to make some sort of a mark. Mm-hmm. And I am so grateful for the education and then the continued education that we've really worked on as a team to stay modern with this nutritional flood of information that comes now. It's such an evolving and constantly changing environment that we can utilize as horse trainers, or even just as amateur exhibitors, to really help build and optimize the programs that we have, whatever they are. You could make any horse better with excellent nutrition. And that's just the simple part of this. And that's maybe the most exciting part of this for somebody that's always been horse crazy, is understanding that we can take a horse and optimize that nutritional field and give them their best, and then they return their best to us, is why it is an exciting thing. And I think it's also why it's an important thing, an evolving thing to continue to talk about and stay educated on. So that's what drives our desire to continue learning and stay up with the most current nutritional trends.
Yeah, I really appreciated what you said about essentially giving our best to the horse, and then we get the best out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, really appreciate that. So from a very practical perspective, what do you feed your horses? What kinds of investment are you making in the brand of feed, the type of feed, the feed based on age or level of work? Just tell us a little bit about your feeding program from a practical perspective.
Well, we can absolutely do that. I would say, to answer your question specifically first, we utilize the Nutrena currently owns Progressive Feeds, and we have utilized Progressive Feeds for more than 20 years now. Progressive Feeds were Buckeye originally and have become Progressive. Those originators or the founders, the PhD, Dr. Don Capper, that originated those nutritional building blocks that have really been the cornerstone for their feed and nutrition program, are still to this day involved in that feed line. And so I have been able to be involved with their group of nutritionists and that feed since early 2000, and watched it modernize. And so I feel very comfortable personally with their products. And so we utilize that as our fortified grain source. And then when we need to optimize based on a horse that comes in with special needs, or something that requires more of a push, we will also supplement them with DAC products. And so that's kind of the specific answer to your question, is Pro Elite feeds on DAC supplements. And we've utilized that for a long, long time. We have customers and we have sold horses in a lot of parts of the country that may not have access to Pro Elite feeds. And I think it's important that we talk about the idea in a halter horse that there's more than one way to get to the same end result. And so what I tell people is the way that I do it works. We have a lot of success and a lot of background in what we're doing, but there are also other ways that work. And so starting with the fundamental that whatever feed line you're going to use, you need to understand if it's a fortified feed. So a feed that isn't a simple grain stuff like oats. If it's a fortified bag of feed with a nutrition label on the bag, that there are PhDs behind that fortified label that have balanced that ration. And after you are wise in your selection of that fortified grain, you need to feed it as it's designed to be fed to optimize what it is that you're purchasing. So we get a lot of people that choose a fortified grain that is available in their area. And a lot of times that may be Purina or Nutrina or one of those major brands that people can get at their local stores. But when we talk to folks about what they're feeding and how, we see a couple of things that I think go wrong regularly. So one is they choose one of those fortified grains, and let's say they choose Purina Ultium Growth or Progressive Growth Formula, like we use to fit our halter horses. If you feed that outside of the label recommendations, you're taking a balanced diet out of its balance. So we hear a lot of people say, hey, I used some Ultium Growth and I cut that in half with oats. And I say, okay, why? They say, well, it saves some money. Some people say that they fit their horses well on oats. Others have talked about this Ultium being a thing, or progressive growth being a thing, or whatever it is that's in their area. And so we want to top dress and give them some of that too. And I would say, Amy, what we don't do at Covenant Show Horses ever is take a balanced ration and separate it away from how it was designed to be fed. It's kind of a cornerstone of what we highlight to not do. So we typically use on, halter horses are all young. If we think about the lifespan of a horse, if you're fitting a halter horse, they're young. Our oldest horses may be 6, 7, 8 years old, and they're well more than half of their life left. Those older horses definitely do not have the same nutrient requirements as a young growing weanling. But in terms of a fitness program, and especially a horse trainer that is going to have 25 head of horses to feed a day and staff that helps them feed, we like to find a feed that the majority of our horses do very well on, and that will optimize their ability for growth, muscularity, structural correctness, and hair coats. So we have utilized Progressive's growth formula because it suits the needs of a weanling as well as it suits the needs of a 4 or 5 year old gelding stud or mare. And we can optimize that with some supplements, especially on the weanlings that may need some help in fast growing times. And so that is the product that we typically use. But we could talk all night about specifics. Young growing horses that are weanlings and yearlings in our halter horse industry, we regularly see have growth spurts that we need to address nutritionally. And so we talk about young horses where if their bony column is growing at a greater rate than their ligature can keep up with, okay, which genetically speaking, we bred our horses to do that, right? We want the biggest, fastest growing and heaviest animals really in our industry. And so when we get a horse that's genetically predisposed to growing fast, and as a result of that, we start to see some angular limb deformity, or even before that, really just some swelling of the joints and painfulness, we address that nutritionally immediately. And so those needs would be very different than the needs of an aged mare that's been in a fitting or training program for 4 to 5 years. So I guess, you know, you have to be a little bit specific about what age, where that horse is at in terms of their fitness, their growth, and then you can help to design a program that best suits their needs.
And really for us, the key to that is for this particular grain profile that we feed, it allows us to have kind of as much as we can, a blanket say, we feed this, but it allows us to kind of modify that, how we feed it in the quantity. And it allows us to modify what each individual needs as we feed the same type feed. That's kind of one of the beautiful things about that grain, is it really does allow us to have all the options within kind of one bag of feed.
And it also, more than one nutrition company have a range of products now that help the individual with that individual's requirements, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is once you get a program, don't come out of the program and put 4 programs together and make your own. There are PhDs sitting behind desks all day long, paid well to balance specific rations. And as horsemen, we can supplement our ration wisely and keep a balanced diet. But when we have the Chinese buffet approach to feeding a halter horse, a little of this, a little of that, and then a little more of this, we really are doing ourselves, our pocketbooks, and our horses not the best. And so, you know, we talk a lot about what works for us, but we start with people by saying, let's select something that you can get regionally in your area, you can consistently get it, and let's feed that feed as it's designed to be fed. And then we'll look at your individual horse's needs, and we'll work on what other needs that horse may have that particular feed may need to have supplemented to it. But we don't take any fortified feed and feed it separately than how it was designed.
And we definitely don't go. I chuckle sometimes when I am at friend stalls or talking to friends on the phone about, you know, well, this customer called and they want me to add this supplement, or they saw this advertisement for this thing to add to the grain or whatever, and now we got to order it, now we got to feed it to their, you know, to their horse. And I kind of chuckle because it's kind of a multi-part problem. There is, you know, is the grain that you're already feeding and the program that you already have those things that you're trying to supplement? Are you just adding more that's going to wind up, you know, they're going to either pee it out or poop it out? Or is it, you know, is it taking out of balance what is there? And or is your horse healthy? Does it even need it? You know, I think a lot of times we as a whole in a society, really we see a lot of fads with workout programs and diet programs for ourselves, and it's easy to get caught up in this supplement and take this, and this helps produce, weight loss, and this produces muscle gain and these things, which I'm sure there's some research for, but it's a lot more specific than here, just buy this bottle of this, or, put this supplement on something to really give you the desired effect. I'm not saying that they don't work sometimes, but you have to really do the research and make yourself educated to know what you're trying to add to is necessary.
I really appreciate the depth of information that you're sharing. You've mentioned a couple of times supplements and different scenarios where people are adding supplements that may or may not be necessary. If I'm an amateur exhibitor and I have my horse at home, or I don't have access necessarily to a one-on-one conversation with somebody who can guide me, how do I know if or when my horse might need a supplement, and how do I select what the supplement might be?
Sure. Good questions. So I would say the first question that you ask yourself is, am I feeding a fortified feed, or am I feeding a unfortified feed? So as an example, an unfortified feed is oats and alfalfa, healthy and safe. I'm not suggesting a person can't do well with that particular diet, but it's unfortified. So if I'm feeding, if as an amateur, what works for me is oats and alfalfa, which several areas of the country still utilize that primarily as their feed source. It will benefit the horse to then further fortify that horse's needs at an age weanling through 4-year-old year, where they are still growing and developing. So if the answer to my first question, is it an unfortified feed, is yes, then supplements will be necessary on a young growing horse to optimize not only their growth, but their soundness and their fitness level. If the answer is I'm feeding a fortified feed, and that horse is on a sustained fortified feed that is being fed the way that fortified feed is designed to be fed, supplements still can play a role if a horse is having an extreme growth rate, where they need some help, where they need a decrease in calories and an increase in mineralization. It can also be utilized if you get a horse that is young and you may be having a hair coat problem, or you may be having a weight problem and you need to press on the gas. So structurally we're doing just fine, but we need more weight. We need a shinier hair coat. Then we use some high fat supplements to further ask that horse's body to perform at its optimum, even in a fortified grain feeding program, if that makes sense. So in a simple way, is it fortified or is it not? If it's unfortified, I'm looking to fortify mineral, vitamin, and amino acids, which can be found in supplements like Topline Extreme that Progressive makes, and other supplements that are designed to increase the volume of mineral, trace mineral, vitamin, and amino acids. And I'm looking for a high-fat supplement that will aid in omega-3 fatty acids and a fat profile that allow my horse's hair coat and weight to optimize on an oat diet. If, on the other hand, I have an aged gelding that's roly-poly fat, really doesn't need any optimization on weight or hair coat, they may need a supplement that helps them to stay at their best in terms of their structural correctness and their soundness. So then you're going to talk again about a trace mineral product where you can keep the calories lower in that horse's diet, but you're not taking the balance of the mineral and those omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that help our joints out of that horse's program. So Yes, supplements are very well used. Which supplements and how they're best used is determined upon what feed you're feeding and what that horse's individual needs are. Weight, body condition, and structural correctness are three areas that you need to look at and say what needs optimized.
If I didn't feel like I was supposed to look into the camera right now, I would be taking notes. Because what you're providing is fabulous. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's really
Thank
good.
you for
I
the
think it's
clarity
important.
and all
I
that.
think it's super important before we leave this. I want to address, because a lot of people call us and ask about this. This young growing horse problem, the weanlings and yearlings, where we see these horses that we need to have and provide all the nutritional help we can as they are young and growing. I want people just in a very general way to remember this. When a horse's legs and joints are looking stressed based on growth rate, so those weanlings and yearlings, again, that are growing faster than their ligaments and their joints can keep up with, what we need to do for those horses is decrease their calories, okay, because that slows that weight down. But at the same time, we have to increase the plane of nutrition on mineral and vitamin. So a lot of times people say, kick those weanlings out, let them slow down in their growth and don't feed them so much. They're right. But they need to say one additional thing. Don't forget to supplement their most vital needs during this time, which is vitamin and mineral uptake for those bones, joints, ligaments, and muscles that are going to be growing and developing. So we talk to people a lot about this because we see this a lot in halter. During that time, utilize these diet balancers that we can find in a lot of different feed groups. Progressive makes an amazing diet balancer, one for alfalfa-based diet programs and one for grass-based diet programs. So Alfalfa Advantage and or Grass Advantage. Utilize something like that, that is all of the vitamin and mineral package a horse needs with very little calories. It's like telling a human to eat nothing but vegetables and lean protein. That's what it is, vegetables and lean protein. We're taking the Snickers, the ice cream, all of the carbs, and we're moving them away from that diet to slow the growth rate. But at the same time, we're providing everything that young growing horse needs to make sure that they're getting the optimal levels of nutrition for the bones and the ligature to continue to develop. So CMZ paste has been a hero. A Rejuvenate paste has been a hero to a lot of people in our industry as a supplement to a diet on a young growing horse that needs a higher level of trace mineral and vitamin than the average horse. Those are two great feed supplements that can help a horse in a young growing condition. Take the calories down and increase your vitamin and mineral. Do it with diet balancers. Do it with those supplements like Rejuvenate or CMZ paste that will optimize what that horse is going through and allow that exhibitor to get through that time where the bones and the ligaments, as well as all of the joints in a horse, can calm down and get back together. And then we'll push the calories again. So I think it's important for us to understand at that time we would come off of a full grain fortified feed and go on to more of a lower calorie, higher supplemented diet to aid that young horse in the development phase that they're going through.
And that also at that time becomes a conversation in hay. which hay choice you're going to go with. Are you going to, do a alfalfa mix, or are you going to do a grass, hay type situation? And all of that is, again, kind of, you have to see what you're dealing with at the moment to decide, are we 50-50, or are we, all the way one way or the other? So you just kind of got to pay attention to those things.
Hay is the number one item that every horseman should talk about when they talk about nutrition. We feed forage using animals grain. A horse will never die on good quality forage and water if they never touch one bite of grain. But if they don't get forage, regular, high quality, constantly provided forage, they will die. So we are feeding a forage-based animal grain to optimize development. But their basic nutritional needs starts and ends with excellent quality forage and clean water. So I guess you're really right. We skipped the most basic of the nutritional principles. Feed consistent, high quality forage. And all different parts of the country have access to different types of forage. But remember that a horse, a young horse, will obviously take in less hay than an older horse based on weight. But all horses should eat 2% of their body weight in forage daily. So a 1,000-pound horse should be eating 20 pounds of forage a day. And less than that is something that creeps that gut into an acidotic, upset stomach, where the grains that you're using, no matter how good they may be, can't be utilized to their greatest advantage due to the acid in the gut. So you're feeding a lot of grain and supplements that may or may not be able to even really be utilized if that gut is not being fed the high quality forage that it requires to keep the acidotic gut low into a happy space for the belly, and for that intestinal tract to stay happy as well. And you're really right about that, Adam. Forage is first. And it is really what we base where a horse needs to go in terms of their grain diet is what access to hay do you have? How much of it are you willing to feed? And then we build that diet really around that first question.
And for us, it's a consistency thing as well. We're fortunate enough down here. We have, hay brokers, and we have, a couple different places that we can utilize getting, quality alfalfa and quality grass hay and different stuff from. But and it's just kind of something that we do. I'm by no means am a hay expert, but there's not a single bale of hay that gets fed at our place that I don't look at before I buy it. We never buy a semi-load of hay and have it shipped in from wherever, even though there's people, my hay suppliers I would trust, but we always look at what we get before we do it, to try to keep a consistent product in front of them. That's something that not a lot of people realize, that can be just as hard, if not actually probably harder on a horse to change hay than it is actually grain, because of their need for hay rather than for grain.
And hay isn't hay. Alfalfa isn't just alfalfa, right?
Right.
We can have alfalfa that has a very high acid detergent fiber profile, meaning in layman's term, real stemmy hay. And we understand that the hindgut in a horse doesn't work anything like the hindgut in cattle. It actually, the stomach and the hindgut of a horse really is much more relatable to hogs and even humans, hogs primarily. So a very stemmy, high acid detergent fiber type of hay will not be utilized in the horse. The hindgut breaks down forage primarily, and it's utilized for fiber, for regularity, for, like I said, the gut to be happy and satisfied. but it's also obviously a nutritional requirement. And so we want what we feed a horse to be broken down easily in the hindgut so we don't have colic issues. So we're looking for alfalfa hay that suits that horse's stomach and hindgut. So, the acid detergent fiber can be easily tested by any local feed store. If you have a shipment of hay come in, most of the feed stores will come out for you and do a hay sample, but if not, bring them a hay sample. Take hay from multiple sources of that particular, if you get 25 big bales in, or you get 400 small bales in, or whatever you get, take some hay from several sources and put that in a baggie and send it to your feed store and let them look at what those nutritional values are. Is the acid detergent fiber under 30%? If the answer is yes, that'll be well utilized in the horse's gut. If it's getting into the 32 to 35%, a lot of that's probably not going to get broken down, and it may even bind up in that horse's gut and sit there a while. That goes for grass as well as for alfalfa hay. We know that alfalfa hay is going to be more calorie dense and have a higher protein typically than grass hay. Now, fortified grass hay like TIF 85 and some of these grass hays that are fortified actually are showing protein levels in the 16 to 18% range, which would be typical of a good quality alfalfa. Extremely good quality alfalfa that would be more like dairy quality will be upwards of 23% protein. The thing that you watch for in alfalfa is another thing that we look for other than acid detergent fiber, the protein levels, is calcium and phosphorus. We talk a lot about a calc-phos ratio in horses. Really high quality alfalfa can sometimes have extreme calcium ratios and very low potassium ratios. So we've seen upwards of like 5 and 6 to 1 ratios on calcium versus phosphorus. If that is the case in your hay, you have to offset that calcium and feed more phosphorus, because we know that a horse ideally will not have any more than a 2 to 1 ratio calcium versus phosphorus. If you just buy that local hay from different sources, you have no idea what your calc-phos ratio is. On a grass hay diet, you'll rarely see a high level of calcium. Sometimes you'll see a higher level of phosphorus, and then you need to be supplementing in that fortified grain a higher level of grass. And that's why some of these great feed companies like Progressive use diet balancers based on hay. They understand that nutritionally, if you're feeding an all alfalfa diet versus an all grass hay diet, the balance of the diet for a diet balancer, a grain source, has to fit what that 20 pounds of something else that horse is eating a day is. So we do look carefully at hay. We talk to customers about what type of hay they're feeding, and we regulate what they need in their grain to balance what they're getting all day long in their forage.
Thank you. I feel like I'm drawn in and listening carefully. I so appreciate just you sharing your level of expertise. I want to take a second to say to our listeners that there'll be a bunch of links either in the show notes or in the comments on social media to a lot of the products that Kelley's talking about with DAC and Progressive. So fear not, there'll be information available. Can we switch gears just a little bit and help us understand what does NSC mean and low NSC, and why is that important for us halter folks?
That's a great question. So we talk a lot right now about starches and sugars, and is it good for my horse? Is it bad for my horse? What do I do with starch and sugars? NSC is just the fancy term for how feed is measured in terms of starch and sugar. So when you're looking at feed tags, some companies with a specialized feed tag, not a what we call a least formula feed tag, will actually guarantee an NSC rate. And what you're looking at there is, again, the total diet and in terms of how the instructions are given, in terms of if they're saying it's an 8-pound or a 6-pound a day ratio. If you feed it as it's designed, they're giving you on that tag a guarantee as to what the ratio of NSC or starch and sugar is in that grain source. And what we know about a horse is that we really want that ratio to be at 20% or lower. Some grains, especially on horses that need a tremendous amount of energy, so show jumpers, endurance horses, race horses, you may see an NSC ratio in that 23 to 25% rate. But for the type of horse we're talking about, our halter horse, a 20% or under ratio in NSC is advised. Horses that have specialized metabolic needs, so horses with Cushing's, metabolic disease, and in our world, very importantly, horses that have tested positive and are symptomatic for PSSM need a ratio lower than that, frankly. Just speaking from experience, they say those horses need 20% NSC or lower. We have found that in the grain source, in the NSC, we are looking more like 12% or lower to minimize the occurrences of stress in that horse's body based on their grain portion of their diet. Interestingly about NSC, or again, starch and sugar broken down in the foregut or the stomach, we don't measure that as much in terms of your forage. It's what they get fed the most. But horses, again, they break down forage in the hind gut. And although alfalfa and grass hay have starches and sugars that are somewhat utilized by the horse, it's broken down differently than it is in the horse's stomach where grain is broken down. And so we worry much less about the carbohydrates associated with forage than we do the carbohydrates and sugar associated with grain, which is why we talk all the time about a low carb diet. Horses are on a high carb diet in terms of forage. It's all carbohydrate, but it's a different type of carbohydrate than the problematic grain source that we get in breaking down grains in a horse's stomach. So, you know, I get this question a lot, like, what should we do? What's the truth? If you have a horse that is symptomatic PSSM, they have a specific problem breaking down carbohydrates in their stomach. It is what is a catalyst for that tying up that we see in horses that are symptomatic with PSSM. And what they specifically need is a primarily forage diet that's supplemented by a high fat and high mineral grain source. So again, low carbohydrate grain source for horses with PSSM. That works tremendously well. There are great products for this in our market. A high quality grain that is fortified should show you their NSC rate on the tag. If they don't, it's because it's a least cost formula tag, and they're going to guarantee you crude protein, crude fat, different guarantees, but they're not going to guarantee you what grain source makes that up. And different grains have very different NSC levels. So when we buy feeds that are least cost formula tags, you have to understand that the grain sources may be changing based on what they can buy at that mill, less expensive. And so when they're buying those big quantities of grain in the commodities business, they're going to buy a grain that can guarantee a crude protein or a crude fat. But like I said, it'll be utilized differently in a horse's gut. Those feed programs that are more fortified and I think more easily used for this high-end type of horse have a specified feed tag that guarantees these types of analysis. And it helps us when we have that type of feed tag to do the best job we can at picking a grain that works for our particular horse and their needs. And so if you have a horse with Cushing's, if you have a horse with metabolic syndrome, if you have a horse that is symptomatic for PSSM, those low starch and sugar, high fat diets in terms of the grain source will be a great benefit to you in terms of fitness.
And I think it's important to note too that in order to make adjustments to their diet, they need to be symptomatic to that. You know, there's horses that are PSSM positive and HYPP positive that never ever have any symptoms to it. Just because they have it doesn't mean that they have the symptoms of it. Now, if they start to become symptomatic, then we start to address it immediately. But not that we always necessarily assume that they're not, but we kind of do in a lot of ways until they prove otherwise. And so in other words, we don't kind of make a problem that's not there until it presents itself. We don't start building that protocol until it's required is kind of what I'm saying.
We do, though, always feed a grain that is 20% or lower in NSC. There's still a lot of carbohydrate in that diet, right? There's plenty of carbohydrate that a normal horse without these metabolic issues can be gaining weight and looking their very best. And so we get concerned that there isn't enough room in the diet for other important nutritional key components like fat, amino acid, vitamin, trace mineral, when we get a diet that's way, way high in sugar and starch over that 20 or 22% NSC. It's like there's only so much room for so many products, and that is taking up too much space. Another thing that is important about NSC, and we talk about grains and what does a horse need? What are they being used for? Halter horses aren't being worked like a racehorse or an endurance horse, right? They're worked 15, 20, 25 minutes maximum a day. And so they work on beauty and bodybuilding all day. They don't work on, like a horse that's out on the ranch all day long. And so the energy that we provide a horse in starch and sugar is a lot like a human. If that's our primary source of energy, our primary calorie source, it's going to go into the bloodstream really, really quickly and provide lots of energy. And then it's going to come back out of that horse really quickly. And so, you'll see some people that have got youth and amateur horses that are more excitable at the shows. And what you look into nutritionally speaking is, are they on a real high carbohydrate diet where when that horse gets excited or there's stimuli that is created by a new environment, they're using that starchy, high sugar diet for kind of an explosion of energy, and then they kind of tank later on. A diet that is at least 20% or lower in NSC, that might be at an 8% or maybe even upwards of 12% fat, are going to have a more even source of energy throughout the day and have less spikes in the day. So we like that, Horses have a great affinity to starch and sugar. It's palatable to a horse. Unlike humans, fat and fat sources are not very palatable to a horse, which is interesting. They're not drawn to fat. But fat as an energy source for a horse is excellent. The omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that are provided in good fats storage within a horse gives you the best hair coats. It gives stallions and mares the most fertility. It helps us to bloom a horse at the most rapid rate. And so we need those good fat sources in all of our show horses diets or in our broodmare and stallion program diets. And we don't want to deprive a horse of a fat source that can be utilized in a million good ways in a horse's diet, feeding them primarily sugar and starch. However, sugar and starch are not an enemy either. It's we don't need to feed horses a keto diet, right? They're not developed or designed to eat keto. So we're not looking for a 25%. I've had people that we've got, again, Arena, Nutrina, and all these great feed companies make these high fat supplements. The DAC oil, it's probably the most palatable fat source on the market. We use it all the time for fat. Horses love DAC oil. And so finding a palatable fat source is sometimes hard, but you cannot fit a horse on just a fat supplement. Well, we've heard people say, oh, well, I took them off all that starch and I've just got them on a high fat supplement. Those high fat supplements aren't designed to be fed that way. It's designed to add fat to a balanced diet. But horses that are metabolic and or have PSSM, look for a grain source. Progressive has a feed called low starch. It's that simple. And it's actually that grain will tag a 7% NSC, starch and sugar combined. So it's a very high fiber, very, very low starch diet. If I'm feeding that to a horse and I want them to be fit to go to the horse show, I know that I have to come along beside that high fiber grain and feed a lot of calories via fat, because you can't keep a horse fit at the level that we need a halter horse fit just on a high fiber diet, right? They need to have calories. They need to have fat in the diet. So in those instances, on a symptomatic PSSM horse or a metabolic horse, utilize either a diet balancer with a high fat supplement beside it, DAC oil, omega. There's an omega product that will have that link through Progressive that is a high fat supplement. There's a lot of that type of feed that you can use with a low starch diet to create an optimum plane of nutrition for that type of horse. Does that answer the question? Maybe too much?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, not too much. No, it creates more questions in my mind about just the variety of horses and potentially listeners that we would have. But I think, yeah, you definitely answered the question. I think about having another conversation where we can maybe address other scenarios or even take questions from people, because you've given us a lot of really great information and very specific ways for us. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think that it's also important in there that it's also somewhat of a misconception, I think, in some people's minds, that we're feeding for fitness. You walk through the barn with our horses and you touch them, it's muscle, it's not fat. So there's a difference in creating kind of a round, full horse with fat versus muscle. And I think that goes back to the whole profile of what we're feeding. And I think, you can make a horse look big by getting it fat, but it's not fit. And there's a big difference in that.
really,
Yeah.
there's so much in that.
And that's it. That's a huge thing to unpackage right there. But talking about all that,
Right.
it just kind of popped in my mind. I'm like, I don't want people to hear this and think that we're feeding all this stuff and we're just making these horses big. We're not. They're genetically predisposed to be fit this way. We're just helping accentuate it with what we're feeding them and allowing their natural body structure to fill out that way.
You hear me say optimize, and that's what I really think we focus on, right? We focus on optimizing the individual. You cannot take a poorly designed, poorly balanced, ill-structured horse that's light muscled and make them a world champion with grain.
No.
You can make them look better.
Yeah.
You can optimize what that horse's individual needs are nutritionally. But we do see people make this mistake a lot. We see people think the fatter I can make this horse, the more I'll win. And really and truthfully, that is not where we are in our industry currently. We want that fit, athletic horse whose weight and hair coat have been optimized by our nutrition programs, not overfed. And so I think that's a great point. I also think people should understand, and I think it surprises people, but horses, the reason that they're designed to eat forage 20 to 22 hours a day is because the stomach of a horse should only ever have a maximum of 6 pounds of anything at one time. And that's a grown horse. When you get more than 6 pounds of any one thing in the stomach of a horse, what happens is it immediately starts passing through into the hind gut and not utilized at all. So we advise people that the old days where, again, we had a smorgasbord of grain all day for a horse, 20, 25 pounds of oats at a time that they ate, when they wanted, how they wanted, isn't optimizing what we now understand about nutrition in horses. That small, frequent meals, very consistently fed. So the same time every day, 7 days a week, is optimizing whatever it is that you choose to use in your nutrition program. And so if you can feed 3 times a day, let's do that. If you can feed 4 times a day regularly, let's do that. It's not that we're feeding more, it's that we're feeding smaller more frequently. And that helps your pocketbook. So those people that want to optimize that high quality grain that is not inexpensive, all that good grain is $30, $35 a bag now. But to optimize what you're doing financially, remembering that if you're feeding, and I mean hay and grain included, if a horse's belly is more full than 6 pounds, their stomach at once, you're wasting money. You're watching money go down the drain. So a smaller regular feed cycle on grain is a great way for anyone with any feed that they choose to use to be optimized, and helps the horse to have much less colic issue and much less acidosis in their belly, much less problem with temperament and ulcers. And so those are all really easy things that we can do to help manage our horse's health and well-being. And I think a big cornerstone to how we've set up our program. I mean, you can set your watch by when that feed cart's coming down our aisleway.
Yeah.
It's horses have a very strong need for a very consistent schedule. It's why you can not wear a watch and know when it's time to feed. If you're around horses, they'll tell you, and they're right every time. So It's by nature, the good Lord developed them that way. And horses that are eating hay all through the day, provided a high quality forage all through the day, and you're 15, 20 minutes off on grain, are going to have less of a problem than those folks that are not feeding a high quality hay regularly, and feeding a larger volume of grain to do the work. It's not, horses aren't designed to eat that way. I always tell people when they say, well, how do I know if I'm doing it right? I say, look at your poop. I mean, it's just that simple. If you have round, healthy horse nuggets and you can't tell what you poured in their feed trough on the other end, you're doing a good job. If on the other hand, you have watery, loose toothpaste stools, that horse's gut is acidotic and it's upset and you're wasting money. If you have a round, nice poop, but you can see the same nuggets that you put in the feed trough coming out the other end, that horse is not breaking down and utilizing what you're putting in at the rate that you would want it to suit the money that's going out for that grain. So I always tell people, it sounds gross, but look at your poop.
And it really coming from the riding side of this, earlier in my career, a lot of my friends have called me and, called Kelley as well. We get a lot of phone calls from, performance horse trainers that want to kind of, how do we get this young one to gain weight and what do we do and all the stuff. And they kind of want to look at us like we have four heads. For a minute when we start asking, well, how much are you feeding grain wise? What are you feeding and how often are you feeding it? And how much hay. And usually they're trying to ration some hay somewhere and they're trying to feed a lot of grain and they're trying to do it twice a day. And when I tell them that you can actually feed less grain, feed it 4 meals a day if you can, if not 3. And let it have all the hay in the world at once, it'll gain weight and it'll bloom the way you want it to. Trying to talk them into it in the beginning is a little struggle. And then after they do it for a minute, and I say, give it 30 days and dry it, or give it 2 weeks. And it really is amazing how a horse's body and their condition will change when you just kind of do that, make some adjustments to it. Just in your frequency of how you're feeding and how much, rationing that you're not trying to do with your hay.
They call us also happy after about 3 weeks of that and say, I'm not lunging him as much. I'm not mad at him as much. Because again, that energy level kind of levels out and their bellies are happy and satisfied. So when I'm hungry, I can be hangry. And it's really the same with a horse, right? So when that acid level gets up in the gut, and we provide a lot of stress to these young horses, right? There's so many new environments and we're asking all of these new things. And so if the stomach, before we start on all of these new things that we are asking a horse to do, is upset, you can imagine how it feels when we increase the stress and acid goes up anyway. So we really talk to our halter horse friends, but also our performance horse friends about, if you just do these core things, feed high quality, very consistent hay very regularly, don't overfeed your grain by being lazy and feeding grain once a day. If a horse is young and growing and they need 12 or 15 pounds of feed in terms of grain, you better be splitting that into 3 feedings. And
not 4.
Right, 3 at a minimum. And so we talk about these core basics that have helped us, and it's amazing to people how quickly things can start to turn around. We have to optimize the gut to optimize the brain. We have to optimize the gut to optimize our legs, and we have to optimize the gut to optimize that outer wrapping, that muscle and hair level that we want. And so how we feed and what we feed are the cornerstones of making that happen.
Well, thank you for this college level education tonight. I know that our listeners are going to appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to finish by just making sure that we know how to find out more about Covenant show horses and your breeding stallion, Hes Stylin. Where can we find out more information about those things?
We are so blessed. We've stood Hes Stylin, which is a paint halter stallion, who really has been life-changing for our careers, for 18 years now. He's 18 years old. I'm sorry, I've stood him 16 years. He's 18 years old this year. He's he is number 3 on the leading sires list at APHA, with the first and second horses being performance horses with those great performance halter points that those horses receive. But he's the highest ranked halter horse on the leading stallions list right now at APHA, and we're just so blessed to have him. Really, that horse has done more for our career in terms of number of world champions in the paint horse breed than I ever could have dreamt possible when we were raising him, as a young horse. To find more information out about that, the best way to do that is to go to our Facebook page. You can look us up, Kelley Wainscott and or Adam Wainscott. We're posting things all the time. And you can also reach out to Barbara Scheffler, our partner, who's also our office manager. And that's at Covenant, S like Sam, H like horse, horses. So SH horses at gmail.com. She's answering questions all the time.
SH office.
Oh, office. That's right. I'm the other one. Covenant SH office.
Yeah.
See, that's why I can't go anywhere without him.
Every once in a while, I'm useful.
Right. Covenant SH office. Sorry, Barbara. I was giving them mine, but I'd rather on email them go to Barbara because she actually answers.
Yeah, and she knows all the answers.
She does know all the magic answers. Yeah.
Awesome.
But he's been just an amazing horse to us. He's the sire of the winningest halter mare in APHA history, which we've been blessed to have her whole career. And she's still with us now, just been retired last year after her 20th world championship, red hot and stylish. And so many other world champions in our history of the couple hundred APHA world champions. He would have sired 150 of them. So for us,
Wow.
and many others across the country. So he's been a staple. He's been one of those once in a lifetime stallions. And he's 18 years old, and collected him just yesterday. We'll collect him again tomorrow. And he's very regularly 350 to 400 million per mill, with 50 mils of semen. He still wants to breed 20 mares a collection, so it's awesome. He makes Adam had not collected a lot of horses because he was always on their backs. So he said to me one day, we were collecting, and he said to me, Kelley, if everybody's first stud was this horse, everybody would think they'd want to have a stud for a living.
Yeah.
And I said, it doesn't always go like this.
I said, I think we probably need to fill the barn with these and just have studs. Doesn't really work.
Maybe.
He's a great
Well, thank
individual,
you,
but he's
guys.
also great nature. We've just been blessed.
That's
Really.
awesome. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. What a great opportunity we have to have you as part of the industry, investing in people and building great horses. So just want to say thank you to both of you for taking the time tonight to share your halter journey and talk about nutrition and just invest in us. So we appreciate you.
It's our pleasure, and it is our absolute heart's desire. People along our early careers, growing up as youth kids, and when we were in our single digits, people poured their hearts and their souls into both she and I, and helped to create a path for us to be able to do what we love to do, which is be around horses all day. And so it's not, we didn't come up with any of this stuff. We just were taught a lot of it along the way and able to put it into application. So people shared it with us, so we feel like it's part of why we were put here, and why the Lord was allowed for us to to be where we are, that we should be able to share it too. So it's our pleasure to share.
Call anytime, anybody out there listening, if you've got questions. We'll always try to answer, or we likely know somebody in a specific area that does this all day, every day, that we can say, hey, reach out to this person or that person, in the nutrition world, on DAC, RJ and Randy are always available, and they will answer anybody's question or meet anybody's need. I mean, they've got great reps all around the country that, will help people to understand what might fit their situation. That's why we've worked with Progressive as long as we have. We have reps in all areas of the country that will pour into people, give them real world advice that suits their specific need. And so there's help out there. There's industry folks like us that are more than willing to take a phone call. And then there's nutrition experts in really all areas of the nation, if you know who to call, that can help guide these conversations specific to one individual horse or an individual program. And so we touched on some stuff tonight, but if people are scratching their heads or wondering where to go, we want to be available to try to help solve some of those questions.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll wrap it up for tonight. So thanks to Kelley and Adam Wainscott and Covenant Show Horses. That is the end of our program for this evening. And regarding Fit for Halter podcast, we're looking for amateur exhibitors and professionals who are willing to make a big investment or a big difference in our industry by investing a little bit of time. If you have a product or service we can promote, sponsorship information is available by emailing fitforhalter@gmail.com. Like, share, and spread the word, and thanks for listening.